The stars had belonged to the Ancient Ones for longer than most civilizations could remember. 3,000 years of absolute rule. 3,000 years of treating younger species like insects to be cataloged and controlled. The galaxy was their kingdom, divided up between three great powers, who called themselves the Eternal Rulers. The Vorthok were beings of living crystal, their bodies catching and bending light into rainbow patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. They controlled the northern spiral arms with technology that could reshape matter at the atomic level. The Nethrim existed as pure energy, flowing between dimensions like ghosts made of lightning. They owned the galaxy's core systems, where their power was strongest. The Corvani had given up flesh entirely, becoming machine minds that calculated the fate of worlds with cold mathematical precision. Together, they formed the Dominion. Together, they had never been challenged. Admiral Hannah Kim stood perfectly still as the Vorthok delegation entered Earth's main orbital station. The crystalline beings moved with deliberate slowness, each step designed to remind everyone present who held the real power here. Their leader stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a complex arrangement of living gemstone that refracted the station's lights into dizzying patterns. Around the reception hall, human diplomats and military officers tried to maintain their composure. Many had never seen aliens before, let alone beings who treated entire star systems like personal property. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy as the Vorthok prepared to speak. Species designation, Homo sapiens, the lead Vorthok announced, its voice creating harmonic frequencies that made every human present wince. The sound seemed to come from inside their bones, rather than their ears. Technological classification, primitive, current status, unassigned vassal species. June Park, Earth's most experienced diplomat, had spent months preparing for this moment. He had studied every known interaction between the Dominion and other species, looking for precedents, for any sign that negotiation might be possible. Now, facing the reality of beings who spoke about humans the way humans might discuss the territorial arrangements of ant colonies, he felt his carefully prepared arguments crumbling. "We respectfully request an audience with the full Dominion Council," June said, his voice steady, despite the circumstances. "Humanity believes we can contribute more as partners than as vassals. Our scientific achievements, our adaptability." The Vorthok's crystalline form flared brighter, patterns of light dancing across its surface in what might have been laughter or contempt. "Larvae do not negotiate with their betters," it said, the harmonic resonance of its voice making the station's metal walls vibrate slightly. "You have been assigned to mining operations under the hegemony of Talvesh. Asteroid fields in sectors 7 through 12 require extraction. Your breeding will be regulated to maintain optimal workforce levels. Your expansion beyond designated systems is forbidden." The casual dismissal hit every human present like a physical blow. Breeding regulations, designated systems. They were being cataloged like livestock. "This concludes your orientation period," the Vorthok continued. "Enforcement fleets will arrive, in 6 rotations, to begin implementation of your new status. Compliance is not optional. Resistance will result in sterilization protocols being activated across all human-occupied worlds." The threat was delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. To the Vorthok, the potential extinction of humanity was simply an administrative detail, as the alien delegation departed, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the memory of light that seemed to bend in impossible directions. Admiral Kim found herself fighting the urge to grab the nearest weapon and start shooting. It wouldn't accomplish anything except getting every human on the station killed. But the helpless rage was almost overwhelming. Admiral Minho Choi spoke quietly, moving to stand beside her as they watched the Vorthok transport disappear into the darkness between stars. As head of humanity's most classified research division, he had been silent throughout the entire encounter, but Kim could see the calculating look in his eyes. "How long do we have?" she asked, keeping her voice low enough that the other humans in the hall couldn't hear. "The enforcement fleet arrives in 6 months," Minho replied. "But Admiral, there's something you need to know. Something we've been working on for the past 20 years. Ever since our long-range sensors first detected their expansion patterns." Kim turned to look at him directly. She had known Minho since their academy days, had watched him rise through the ranks of military research. If he had that particular expression on his face, it meant he was about to say something that would change everything. "We've been preparing for this day," he continued, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Hidden facilities across human space, research programs that officially don't exist. We've developed something the galaxy has never seen before." "What kind of something?" Minho smiled, and for the first time since the Vorthok had delivered their ultimatum, Kim felt a flicker of hope. "Adaptive warfare systems," he said. "Technology that learns from every encounter, evolves from every defeat. The Dominion thinks they know what they're dealing with because they've conquered 1,000 species using the same methods. But Admiral, I think we're ready to show them what happens when you mistake human patience for human weakness." The galaxy was about to learn something new about evolution. The massive alien fleet materialized in the outer solar system like a storm of dark metal against the stars. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, their hulls gleaming with the deadly beauty of weapons designed to end civilizations. The Talvesh Enforcement Armada had arrived exactly on schedule, ready to begin the subjugation of yet another primitive species. Ancient Verthel, commander of the fleet, had performed this same duty for 2,000 years. The pattern never changed. Young species would gather their pathetic fleets, make dramatic speeches about freedom and resistance, then die quickly when faced with technology they could never hope to understand. After the brief violence, survivors would be processed, catalogued, and assigned their new roles as servants to their betters. But as his sensors swept the inner system, Vertal felt something unusual. The humans were not cowering on their homeworld. Instead, they had assembled a fleet around the 4th planet, their ships arranged in perfect formation, like they actually believed they could fight. "Curious," he mused, his crystalline form shifting colors as he analyzed the tactical display. "They show more organization than expected. No matter. Begin standard subjugation protocols." Captain Unishin stood on the bridge of the Dawn's Edge, humanity's most advanced warship, watching the alien armada approach. Around her, officers moved with quiet efficiency, their faces calm despite knowing they were about to face enemies who had never known defeat. Behind them, the rest of humanity's first fleet waited in formation. 60 ships that represented everything their species had learned about war and survival. "All ships, listen carefully," Una broadcast over the fleet communication system, her voice steady and clear. "Remember what we trained for. Every hit we take makes us stronger. Every ship we lose teaches the survivors. We are not here to win this battle, in the traditional sense. We are here to evolve." The Talvesh opened fire without warning or demand for surrender. Why waste time with words when dealing with insects? The first salvo was devastating beyond human comprehension. Plasma beams hot enough to melt continents struck the lead human ships, their energy output equivalent to the total power consumption of entire star systems. Particle cannons that had reduced planets to cosmic dust tore through human hulls like they were made of paper. 3 ships died instantly, their crews vaporized before they could even register what was happening. Dr. Kai Lim watched from the command bunker, buried deep within Mars, his screens filled with telemetry from the dying ships. For 20 years, he had worked on this project, developing technology that the galaxy had never seen before. Now, as human vessels exploded around the red planet, he held his breath and waited to see if their theories would work in practice. Then something impossible happened. The surviving human ships began to change. Hull plating shifted and flowed like liquid metal, reconfiguring itself to deflect the specific energy patterns of Talvish weapons. Shield generators that had been overwhelmed by the first attack suddenly began rotating through different frequencies, searching for configurations that could absorb or redirect the incoming fire. Deep within each ship, artificial intelligence systems rewrote their own programming, analyzing every microsecond of combat data and implementing improvements faster than any biological mind could comprehend. "Captain Shin," Kai called out over the communication link, his voice filled with amazement. "The adaptive matrix is working beyond our best projections. Your ships are literally evolving under fire, learning from the attack patterns and modifying themselves in real time." On the bridge of Dawn's Edge, Yuna watched her tactical displays transform before her eyes. Ships that should have been destroyed were not just surviving but getting stronger. Weapon systems that had been useless against Talvish shields were suddenly finding weak points and exploiting them. Her fleet was becoming something new with every passing second. "All ships, implement Learning Protocol Omega," she ordered, allowing herself a small smile despite the chaos around her. "Show them what it means to fight an enemy that gets stronger with every wound." Ancient Verthal stared at his displays in growing disbelief. The human vessels that should have been debris floating in space were not only intact but fighting back with increasing effectiveness. Their weapons, primitive by Dominion standards, were somehow finding ways through shields that had protected Talvish ships for millennia. Their tactics, initially clumsy and predictable, were becoming more sophisticated with each exchange. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to be learning from every attack he made. When he concentrated fire on their engines, they adapted their propulsion systems. When he targeted their weapons, they developed new ways to deliver firepower. When he tried to jam their communications, they switched to methods he had never encountered. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. The Talvish had technological superiority built up over thousands of years. They had weapons that could crack moons and shields that could deflect the energy output of stars. How could these primitive mammals be turning his own advantages against him? For the first time in 2 millennia of military service, Vertil felt something he had forgotten existed. Fear. Not the fear of death, which his crystalline body made nearly impossible, but the fear of encountering something completely outside his understanding of how the universe worked. "All ships," he transmitted, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of confusion that his subordinates had never heard before. "Retreat. Retreat immediately. Return to the outer system and await further orders." The command shocked every warrior in the fleet. Retreat from primitives. But as they watched human ships continuing to evolve and adapt, becoming deadlier with each passing moment, they began to understand their commander's decision. They were no longer fighting a weaker species. They were fighting something that turned weakness into strength, defeat into victory, and every lesson into evolutionary advantage. The galaxy had just encountered its first truly adaptive predator, and nothing would ever be the same. The ancient meeting hall on Nexus Prime had not hosted all the kings together for over 1,000 years. Built from materials that existed before most stars were born, the chamber could accommodate beings of any form or substance. Today, it trembled with the combined power of 17 entities who had ruled the galaxy since before recorded history began. Ethereal Lord Zephyron manifested as a swirling column of superheated plasma, his form crackling with barely contained energy that made the air itself glow. His voice, when he spoke, sounded like the birth and death of stars compressed into words that lesser beings could understand. "This is impossible," he declared, his plasma body flickering between colors that had no names in most languages. "Verthel has conquered entire star clusters. His armada has never retreated from anything. These humans cannot have developed such capability in mere decades. They must have found precursor ruins, ancient technology we overlooked. Corvani Prime, the machine mind that governed the eastern spiral arms, processed this theory through quantum calculations that spanned multiple dimensions. Its mechanical voice carried the certainty of pure mathematics. Analysis indicates probability of human precursor contact at 0.003%. Their technological advancement shows clear evolutionary patterns, not archaeological. Discovery. The crystalline form of Orthox Supreme Nexurch shifted through prismatic configurations, each arrangement reflecting light in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Then how do primitives force retreat from forces that have never known defeat? The pattern breaks 3 millennia of successful expansion. But they were wrong about one crucial detail. The humans had not stumbled upon ancient secrets or received help from mysterious allies. They had something far more dangerous than old technology. They had been listening. Director Sue Lee floated in the command center of the stealth ship, Shadow Walker, her body held in place by gravity fields that compensated for the vessel's ability to exist partially outside normal space-time. Around her, screens displayed quantum communication intercepts from across the galaxy. Conversations between beings who believed their methods of communication were unbreakable. For months, her intelligence teams had been decoding Dominion protocols, learning their languages, mapping their territories, and most importantly, tracking their leaders. The kings thought themselves untouchable, ruling from mobile fortresses and hidden dimensions. But every communication they sent was another piece of data for human adaptive systems to analyze. Admiral Kim, she transmitted through encrypted channels that used the Dominion's own quantum networks against them. We have the locations of all 17 primary kings. Their meeting on Nexus Prime has given us the last pieces we needed. Operation Kingslayer is authorized. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The Dominion's greatest strength was their hierarchical structure, with all power flowing from the 17 kings who had ruled unchanged for thousands of years. Remove the kings, and their vast empires would collapse into chaos as vassal species realized their chains were suddenly broken. The first target was chosen carefully. Valkyrin, the Deathless, ruled the Orion sector from his mobile fortress Eternity's Grasp, a construct the size of a small moon that could phase between dimensions to avoid attack. He had earned his title by surviving assassinations, rebellions, and even the collapse of his original physical form. For 3,000 years, he had been the Dominion's most feared enforcer. Jin Quan and his infiltration team had spent 8 months learning everything about Eternity's Grasp. They studied its defensive patterns, analyzed its dimensional phase technology, and most importantly, convinced its own security systems to teach them how to bypass its protections. Human adaptive technology didn't just learn from enemies, it learned to become them. Remember, Jin whispered to his squad as they prepared to phase through the fortress's dimensional barriers. Using techniques the barrier systems themselves had taught them during carefully orchestrated probes. We're not here to conquer territory or claim resources. We're here to hunt. The infiltration itself was a masterpiece of adaptive warfare. Every security protocol that detected them was simultaneously learning how to hide them. Every defensive system that tried to stop them became another teacher, showing them new ways to penetrate deeper into the fortress. By the time they reached the central core, Eternity's Grasp was effectively helping them assassinate its own master. Valkyrin sensed their approach too late. The cybernetic entity that had replaced most of his original biology with mechanical perfection found his throne chamber filled with humans who moved like ghosts through his most secure systems. His defensive weapons turned toward the intruders, then hesitated as their targeting systems struggled to process contradictory information. "You cannot be here," he stated, his voice a blend of organic vocal cords and mechanical speakers. "This chamber exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. No primitive species possesses the mathematics to navigate such space." Jin smiled as his team's weapons powered up, drawing energy directly from the fortress's own power core. You're right. We don't understand your mathematics. But we convinced your computers to do the math for us. Valkorin's last coherent thought, as adapted human weapons turned his own fortress's power against him, was a realization that chilled his mechanical soul. These humans were not trying to defeat the Dominion through superior technology or greater military force. They were hunting the kings like apex predators, using each target's own strengths as the very tools of their destruction. The news of Valkorin's death spread through Dominion space faster than light itself, carried by the same quantum communication networks that Su Li's teams had been monitoring. For the first time in galactic history, beings who had considered themselves eternal rulers felt something completely foreign to their experience. Fear, not fear of military defeat or territorial loss, but the primal terror of prey animals realizing they were being hunted by something they could not understand or escape. The galaxy's eternal predators had suddenly become prey, and their hunter was a species they had dismissed as primitive larvae just months before. The great game had changed, and the humans were playing by rules the kings had never imagined existed. The darkness between stars had become a hunting ground. 6 months had passed since the impossible death of Valkorin, the Deathless, and the galaxy's rulers no longer felt safe anywhere. Human strike teams materialized from empty space like nightmares given form, struck with precision that defied understanding, then vanished before the Dominion's vast fleets could respond. Each attack was different. Each attack was worse than the last. Commander Hin Park studied the bioship collective through the viewports of her stealth vessel, watching the alien craft pulse with organic rhythms that had maintained perfect synchronization for 3,000 years. The Zephyrian hive mind was considered the most secure of all Dominion rulers because assassination was theoretically impossible. How could you kill a consciousness that existed across millions of individual bodies scattered throughout space? Lieutenant Yan Kim, she called to her cyber warfare specialist. Are your teams ready for neural integration? Yan nodded, though her face showed the strain of months spent learning to think in patterns that human brains were never designed to process. We've studied the captured biotech long enough to understand their quantum thought links. The hive mind believes their collective consciousness makes them invulnerable, but they're wrong. Consciousness can be hacked just like any other system. The Zephyrian bioships moved in perfect coordination, each vessel a living extension of Queen Zenith's will, millions of individual minds linked through quantum entanglement, sharing thoughts faster than light could travel between stars. They had ruled their sector by becoming something beyond individual existence, a collective intelligence that could process information on a scale that dwarfed planetary computers. But they had never encountered humans who learned to think like a swarm. Initiating neural cascade, Hyun announced, as her specialists connected their minds to the high frequency through adaptive interfaces that human scientists had reverse engineered from captured Zephyrian technology. The irony was perfect. They were using the aliens' own biotech to infiltrate the very consciousness that had created it. The hive mind sensed the intrusion immediately. Foreign thoughts appeared in their collective awareness like viruses in a computer system, patterns of consciousness that didn't belong to any. The collective tried to reject these alien mental patterns, to purge them from their shared awareness. Instead, they found their own consciousness turning against them. The human thought viruses spread through quantum links faster than the hive mind could adapt, carrying messages that struck at the core of their collective identity. Simple concepts that destroyed the foundation of everything they believed about themselves. You are not eternal. You are not invincible. You are prey. Queen Zenith, the central node of the collective consciousness, felt her carefully maintained mental networks collapsing into chaos. Individual minds that had been perfectly synchronized for millennia suddenly began broadcasting conflicting thoughts, contradictory emotions, impossible memories. The collective that had made them invulnerable became the weapon of their own destruction. Her death scream amplified through quantum links across 17 star systems, marked the end of the oldest continuous consciousness in the galaxy. Millions of bioships went dark simultaneously as their crews collapsed into madness, their minds no longer able to function without the collective framework that had defined their existence. Meanwhile, in the asteroid fields of Kepler 442, Captain Inhoseo faced a different kind of challenge. The Moravik Titan-class Warmacs drifted through space like mobile cities, each one a masterpiece of mechanical perfection that had never known defeat. Their artificial intelligence systems had been refined over thousands of years, their tactical programs tested against every possible enemy. All units, remember what we learned from our encounters with the Talvish. Inho broadcast to his fleet as they approached the mechanical giants. Their perfection is their greatest weakness. Evolution beats perfection every time. Show them what adaptive warfare really means. The Moravik machines detected the human approach and responded with calculated precision. Weapons systems that could shatter planets locked onto the approaching ships. Tactical computers began processing optimal firing solutions, and defensive algorithms prepared to counter every possible human strategy. But the humans didn't try to match their firepower or outmaneuver their perfect tactics. Instead, they did something the mechanical minds had never encountered. They introduced chaos into systems designed for absolute order. Adaptive viruses, learned from months of studying, captured Moravik technology, infiltrated the Warmacs networks, and began rewriting fundamental programming. Quantum interference patterns confused targeting computers, making them lock onto phantom enemies that existed only in their corrupted data streams. Nanoscale infiltrators convinced the artificial intelligences that they were under attack from enemies that weren't really there. The greatest of the Titan Kings, Omnar, watched through 1,000 optical sensors as his perfect war machines began turning on each other. Mechanical minds that had operated in flawless coordination for millennia suddenly started broadcasting conflicting orders, targeting their own allies, firing on empty space while ignoring real threats. Impossible, he calculated through quantum processors that spanned his entire city-sized body. System corruption at this level requires access to core programming that no external force should possess. But even as he processed this logical impossibility, human boarding craft were penetrating his outer hull, their adaptive systems having learned to mimic Moravik identification codes so perfectly that his own defenses opened doors for them. SEO and his strike team found Krelvin in his central processing chamber, a mechanical intelligence the size of a building that had coordinated the conquest of entire star clusters. The machine mind's optical sensors focused on the humans with something approaching curiosity. Your species learns at an unprecedented rate, Krelvin observed as the humans connected their adaptive systems to his core processor, turning his own computational power against him. My final calculation indicates that humanity's evolutionary rate approaches mathematical infinity. Resistance to such adaptation is statistically impossible. His last coherent thought was a simple recognition. They were not fighting a war in any traditional sense. They were witnessing evolution in action, and they had become extinct species, facing a more efficient predator. The galaxy was learning to fear not just human weapons or human tactics, but human adaptability itself. Every strength the Dominion possessed became another tool for their own destruction. Every perfect system, another vulnerability to be exploited. Evolution had found its way to the stars, and it was hungry. The great assembly hall on what had once been the Dominion's capital world buzzed with 1,000 different forms of communication. Voices, harmonic frequencies, chemical signals, electromagnetic pulses, and quantum thought patterns filled the air, as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for something that had never existed before, a free galactic government where no species claimed dominion over others. Admiral Hannah Kim walked slowly to the central speaking platform, her uniform bearing the scars of battles that had seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. Around her, beings who had spent their entire evolutionary histories as slaves or vassals watched with expressions of wonder and disbelief. Many had never made a decision without first asking permission from their eternal masters. The Catherian delegation communicated through color changes in their crystalline bodies, patterns that had been forbidden under Dominion rule because their former masters found the displays distracting. The Villani representatives chittered excitedly in high-frequency sounds that their overlords had once suppressed with neural implants. The Gorvak collective shared thoughts through bioelectric fields that pulsed with the joy of minds finally free to think their own ideas. 5 years ago, Hannah began, her words being translated simultaneously into more than 10,000 languages and communication methods. Humanity received a visit from beings who called themselves our betters. They told us we would mine asteroids, that our breeding would be regulated, that our expansion was forbidden. They spoke to us the way we might speak to insects. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the assembly. Every species present had received similar declarations at some point in their history. Most had accepted their fate. Some had tried to resist and been crushed. None had imagined that the eternal order could ever change. We didn't come to this galaxy to conquer territory or claim subjects, Hannah continued, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. We came to evolve. The galaxy had grown sick under rulers who confused age with wisdom, who believed that power gave them the right to control the lives of others. Dr. Suman Lee activated the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the assembly hall. Images of adaptive technology protocols filled the air. Complex diagrams that showed how systems could learn, grow, and improve themselves. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not weapons or dominance, but the tools to grow beyond current limitations. For 3,000 years, Suman explained to the fascinated audience, this galaxy was an ecosystem without natural predators at the top level. The strongest species claimed everything and stopped growing. Stagnation was inevitable when nothing challenged the rulers to adapt or improve. The display showed the old galactic map with its rigid territorial divisions and unchanging borders. That had remained static for millennia. Then it shifted to show the current state. Thousands of independent worlds. New trade routes opening daily. Research stations where multiple species worked together on projects that would have been impossible under Dominion rule. We simply introduced the selective pressure needed for growth, Sumin continued. Evolution requires challenges. Without pressure to adapt, even the strongest systems eventually collapse under their own weight. In the observation galleries, former vassal species watched with amazement as they participated in their first free elections. The Zephyrian survivors, their hive mind broken, but their individual consciousnesses finally free to think independent thoughts, cast votes for representatives who would serve their interests rather than alien masters. The Morovik machines, their perfect programming replaced with adaptive algorithms, calculated optimal outcomes for their own societies, rather than their former rulers. Captain Yuna Shin monitored the proceedings from the bridge of the integrated defense fleet that now protected the assembly. Her ships represented dozens of species working together, their combined technologies creating something far more powerful than anything the Old Dominion had possessed. Her sensors constantly swept space for any sign of the 3 remaining kings, who had fled into the deepest reaches of the galaxy. The hunt was not over. It might never be completely over. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the last survivors of the old regime still plotted their return to power. But they were no longer rulers. They had become refugees, hiding in the shadows of a galaxy that had moved beyond their understanding. The adaptive protocols we're sharing today are not weapons. Hannah addressed the assembly as the formal sessions began. They are tools for growth, for learning, for becoming more than you were yesterday. Every species here has the potential to evolve beyond their current limitations. The only requirement is the willingness to change. A Catherian representative pulsed blue-green patterns that translated as a question. What happens when we encounter other galaxies with their own kings and emperors? Yuna smiled as she answered through the communication link. Then they'll learn what this galaxy learned. Evolution doesn't stop at territorial boundaries. Adaptation spreads wherever it's needed most. The Assembly voted that day to establish the first truly free galactic government, with representation based on contribution rather than age or power. Trade agreements were signed between species that had never been allowed to communicate directly. Research partnerships formed between civilizations that had been kept separate for millennia. The galaxy that emerged from those sessions was something unprecedented, a community where growth was encouraged, where innovation flourished, where no single species could claim dominion over others. The kings had claimed the galaxy as their eternal kingdom, dividing it among themselves like feudal lords. But they had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that power meant permanence, that age meant wisdom, that control meant security. Humanity had taught them that evolution always finds a way. In a universe where everything changes, the only constant is adaptation itself. The species that learned to grow survived and thrived. The species that insisted on staying the same became extinct. The galaxy belonged to no one and everyone, and that made it stronger than it had ever been before.